Thank you so much for staying with us. Just before our next conversation, we want to let you know that for our DSTV viewers only, we are taking you to Kano State for the investiture of the second Chancellor Alhaji Aliko Dangote at the combined convocation ceremony at the convocation area Adustek Wudil. And again, that is just for DSTV watchers, viewers only. But for the rest of us, stick with us on other platforms.
Yes, so the Federal Executive Council, FEC, has approved a Nigeria First economic policy targeted at prioritizing the use of local manufactured goods and services in all government procurements. Excuse me, did that tickle you?
Keep correcting yourself.
To look at this with us this morning, I'd like to welcome Mr. Olawale Ajayi, Professor of Legal, Social and Political Environment of Business and Head of Department of Strategy, Lagos Business School, and he joins us via Zoom. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Were you also laughing when I was making that introduction?
Well, I wondered why you were laughing. I guess some cynicism there.
Well, she chuckled.
Well,
you need to explain.
Professor, I'll let you know, because we had discussed this earlier when we opened the program and said that this is where our leaders have to lead from the front. They have told us we have to put Nigeria first, but they also have to put Nigeria first. That is why we were chuckling.
Very well.
So,
I think that that's useful. However, I think we need to acknowledge the, shall we say, the sense and commend that policy or that statement of that policy direction. And I would say that what we need to do is not to be unduly cynical, but to help or advocate policies that can, measures that can make the policy workable and successful. Okay. Perhaps you're correct that leadership must be demonstrated, and rightly so. There must be leadership by example.
But Prof, this is not the first time we're having this policy. It's like we just happen to have forgotten about it, and now it's being reintroduced. So, is there a place for consistent messaging as far as this policy is concerned?
Well, I think the important thing is that the policy is a statement, or it's really what government will or will not do. But there's a difference between a policy statement and implemented policy. And I think the important thing is on having the right, shall we say, sets of negotiations, the right sets of consensus or agreement among all stakeholders who are involved in order to ensure that the policy is implemented. Now, what I mean is to say that once government announces a policy, as happens all over the world, there will be winners and losers. Some people are going to make money and some people are going to lose money. Generally, those who have probably been doing things in a different way that the policy is now curbing. And because of that, there's a heavy amount of competition, contestation, sabotage, and so on and so forth. And this is what is going to determine whether that policy will thrive or not. As far as Nigeria is concerned, it has been the typical pattern between importers and manufacturers that the importers tend to win. The manufacturers have the disadvantage of the poor infrastructure, lengthy and expensive financing cycles, etc. All the things that make for disadvantage in manufacturing in Nigeria. But importers, basically what you need to do is just have money, order from abroad, open an LC or whatever, and bring in those goods. And they're not adding any value, but they make money and they make immediate money. And so what I found when I was manufacturing is that the importers lobby seem to have more success with government bodies, than the manufacturers. And before you know it, the policy is reversed or is watered down. In the case of the tire industry in which I was involved, for example, we had people, including actors, in the corridors of Aso Rock, who virtually said, well, we import tires, and in some manner subverted local manufacturing. We see the same thing happening with Dangote refinery. It's a cycle. So unless there's a way to handle this, and what I would say is that importers should become part of the value chain. Some measure must be found, or some measures must be devised whereby they become part of the local production value chain. Otherwise, they're going to sabotage the policy. This policy is about procurement. And this is an area where there is a high level of corruption and lack of transparency. So it's evident that unless we don't want the policy to be dead on arrival, more steps must be taken beyond pronouncing the policy. It even has to go into, be dovetailed and closely managed with our industrial policy and our national growth strategy, because there's a lot of heavy lifting there. But it's the right step in the sense that there's need for Nigeria to have an industrial base, perhaps a production base.
Yeah. Prof, perhaps one of the challenges is, the general, what Alero mentioned the other time, the general communication of the whole ideal. I remember at some point the president of the African Development Bank, Professor Dr. Additional, said a number of times that it's sad that to bring a product into Nigeria is cheaper than to buy Nigerian. It was
Correct.
So at some point. Now, when you say there is a lot of heavy lifting, that's the first thing that came to my mind. Do you think we are ready for the heavy lifting?
Can we avoid not to do the heavy lifting? I think that really is what we have to bear in mind. Nigeria is in danger of becoming the dumping spot of Africa because of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement and arrangements. It had better become a production hub in Africa. Otherwise, it will have to be a receiver of goods, maybe even from Ghana, or even countries that rearrange their strategy in the right way to become production centers.
The reason why that's even a little more, my apologies, sir, the reason why that's a little more troubling for me is years ago, I saw an article, I'm still looking for it online, where Chief Obafemi Awolowo was quoted as saying to a group of students in the UK, pre-independent, that the politicians of his day, pre-independent, were biased for foreign products, foreign importation into the country, as opposed to buying Nigerian as far back as pre-independent. So it's a can I say it's a generational problem? And I remember, Mr. Audu-Ogbe, or Chief Audu-Ogbe, while he was Minister of Agriculture, saying that some Nigerians had a penchant for importing something as trivial as pizza from outside Nigeria. Pizza via private jets. I like this particular one and I want to bring it in. So that's why I'm asking, if we say we have to do some heavy lifting, then some serious conversations have to be had. What are these conversations, in your opinion, that must be had, and who would you say should lead the charge?
Necessarily, the president has to lead the charge. Beyond the policy, the measures I think that need to be put in place, you're correct. Production costs in Nigeria are at least 30-40% higher than imported goods. And this is because of the poor infrastructure, etc., etc. That's a given that will not go in 1 minute. So we probably we need to put policies, measures in place, and many of them are actually existing, to promote local manufacturing. Now, the point there is that you need scale. And I would say what we need is investment. We need to make Nigeria an investment, venue. And we cannot sort of have this across all of Nigeria because of issues with infrastructure and etc. But if we use the the economic zones, the type of policy that China did, you can have. We need to work with clusters of manufacturing, services, etc., to which infrastructure can be provided. We need to attract. We need to sort of pin Nigerian manufacturing, or manufacturing in Nigeria rather, into regional and global value chain. So we need to really work to bring in investment. The truth is that we have many of the raw materials that are needed. Our educational system also needs to be put right. But that may not even be across board all at once. We need to determine in what areas or which skills we really need, and then try and upskill that, very quickly. This is following the Indian strategy of niche advantage. They cannot compete with China on all fronts. But if they determine that we want to go to space, they put everything in place to ensure that they have the right persons to help with space. You have the production and so on and so forth. So I think these are some of the things that we need to do. What I generally say these days is that actually what the president should be talking about is make Nigeria the investment capital of the world. Everything that you need to do to make that happen will turn around the country. And that is the secret of China. The secret of China is not really merely local content. Actually, it is because China has found a way, things are changing now, of course, found a way to attract capital investment into China. And what they did was to subsidize at the level of factors of production. It's not even at the level of, subsidies, tax subsidies. They do that as well. But in terms of factors of production, they found a way to subsidize their industry. But China is moving out of, low value added manufacturing. And Nigeria can attract some of such, as Vietnam and some of the countries around China have done. So it needs a more, more comprehensive working, and it needs to be what's it now? This needs to be the credo. But it's not just manufacturing; it's also in terms of services. So if financial services is doing well, which it is, we need to see how to turbocharge that a lot more. I think it's this comprehensive working and going about it dedicatedly over time that will really lift Nigeria. We're at an inflection point. And we need entrepreneurs. We don't need commission agents, people who have access to money and can import. We need people who are going to, work, either invest on their own or work with partners to invest in production. This includes agriculture, manufacturing, type of things that Dangote and some other people are doing. Finally, so that I can stop on this point, cement industry under Obasanjo was able to get a series of measures that helped them to scale up local production. And I've always wondered, if we could do it with cement, why don't we do it with some other sectors as well? Nollywood or entertainment is doing well. Why can we not really do a lot more work ensuring that we capture more value in Nollywood? The cameras need to be made in Nigeria. The technology needs to be done in Nigeria, which is not to say don't do anything abroad. It's to tell those people, come and invest in Nigeria. And I think that's really the sense and logic I would see that we need to follow. But it's a commendable policy, and if you say it's a restatement of policy, it's something that we need to do and keep at.
Professor, what you have just said about the example you gave of making cameras in Nigeria, that seems to be a tall order, because how much would those cameras sell for when they have factored in all the taxes they have to pay, the electricity not being available? The cameras will be 10 times what it would cost if they imported it. So why wouldn't they just go ahead and import it?
Yeah, so that is why I said if we use special economic zones where there's power, where there's financing, where you have production policies, but this is not production for Nigeria alone. It is production at scale. So what we're really saying is, manufacturers, well, is producing how many films a day? I don't know, maybe 100 or more, and it is not producing just for Nigeria. Make those cameras that you want to sell across the world, come and make them in Nigeria. What we need to do is find the logic that makes it attractive for those people to come into Nigeria to make products, particularly products in which we have comparative advantage. And the thing to do is to turn comparative advantage into competitive advantage. I think that is the logic that we must follow here. We must find a way to scale beyond those limitations to production. So I think there's no point, throwing up our hands decade after decade saying it's not possible. The important thing is, how do we make it possible? With vision and with enthusiasm. And we need the citizenry, because as your colleague said, if Nigerians continue with this propensity for imported goods, it's not going to help. The Indians, for example, at least as far as their clothing, their production is concerned, they will buy Indian. The middle class, upper middle class, and the richer people will go for luxury goods. But, well, so to say, the Chinese, for example, they are producing everything. Of course, they are wearing. Those who are richer go for products that are made in Italy. But at least in terms of the scale of production, China is producing at overcapacity, and in fact also stunting developing countries. And I think Nigeria needs to sort of find a way to get into that, that value chain, find a way to get into those value chains. And it's not just production for Nigeria, but production for global value chains.
Okay.
And it may not be all the products, but at least you assure that you are producing at scale, and you can sell that regionally and globally.
But Prof, does the Nigerian himself not have a peculiar problem? And I'm saying this because, for instance, look at the shoes made in Aba that can compare with anywhere in the world, and you see them tag it made in Italy, but it is made in Aba, because the Nigerian will not want to buy what is made in Aba. And it's the same for many other goods. It's not just for shoes. I saw a video last week of a factory in Aba somewhere making clothing. And I mean, the person who posted it said, "This is not China. This is Aba, Nigeria." A full factory making garments. But are we going to buy those goods?
So that's why I said it's all the stakeholders. But the point is that all over the world, people want to buy quality. Even the poor want to buy quality. So producers must produce quality, but find a way to sell it at price points that are affordable. Now, the Nigerian problem is that is what probably we call the Veblen effect. That idea of, oh, I'm wearing more sophisticated goods and so on. I think there are two levels. One is we need to give pride in Nigerian production. We need to ensure that Nigerian production is at the quality that is world class. And I think if we can get global producers to join our efforts in one way or the other, that will really help. I mean, Americans would rather buy made in China. I'm talking about the large scale of Americans than made in California, which would be extremely expensive.
Yeah.
But we need to work on our values. But we also need to ensure that we're able to produce that quality scale. Talking about shoes, for example, it's only shoes, it's also bags. Very good quality being made, but because these are being made by people, small manufacturers, they cannot have the scale and quality to really make an impact. And this is also part of the issues we need to sort of solve. Good to have, what you call handmade goods, but we need people who can get into value chains where they are making to order thousands and so on and so forth. And so a lot of work needs to be done in that area. I see these as opportunities. And I think we need to focus on the opportunities rather than major on the problems. But you're correct. It needs everyone working together. And the countries that have industrialized have followed a strategy of partnership between government, business, labor, and society. And that is what we also need to do in Nigeria. We must do in Nigeria.
Prof, I'm trying to find a good way to say this. I was part of a conversation once where we found out that a whole chunk of the leather used for Italian products are from Nigeria.
Designer.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
The leather is imported after tanning to Italy, and whatever else is done there, it comes back as made in Italy, and our people are head over heels looking for them. What's also funny, Prof, I saw a bag. This bag is nothing short of what we call Ghana must go. Only one thing made the difference. It had a tag, YSL.
Oh dear.
That's all. And it was being carried. It was being carried the way my grandma used to carry bags, by a white person. And this thing was costing the money you used to buy land and build a house. Now, it goes to one thing. On the one hand, legislation. On the other hand, enforcement. Do you see enforcement ever happening?
Well, you see, it cannot just be legislation and enforcement. There has to be, for example, this Nigeria First policy, just like the executive order issued by the former president. These have to be legislated into content legislation. But whether they're legislated or not, they must be implemented by government agencies. they need to be embraced by business associations working in alliance with government. They need to be supported by the citizenry. So legislation is one part. A lot of it also has to do with what shall I call it now, various types of campaigns. Some of it has to be branding campaigns. Some of it has to be value orientation campaigns. But a lot of it has to be by way of economic incentives. You know, you cannot moralize economic incentives.
But Prof, you know, we have
must...
we have this local content law. My apologies for butting in. We have this local content law. For the life of me, I've always wondered why it was only about the oil and gas industry. Why is it not something that spans the entire spectrum of our economy? So we're not only talking about local content in the oil and gas industry alone, we're talking about local content in education, in IT, in absolutely every facet of our lives. For as long as it is something that can be produced in Nigeria, there is no reason for it to be imported. That's what I meant by legislation.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Probably in the oil and gas sector, it was necessary to do so. But in cement production, we didn't have any such legislation. But there was a government, policy basically to encourage the manufacturers to upscale their production efforts. Of course, there was sort of a ban or restriction on imports. If you wanted to import cement, well, it was the producers who were being sort of allowed to import cement. And of course, there were some regulations and so on and so forth. But it was a bit under the radar, so to say, but it did work. And remember, one of the prime points at which Dangote turbocharged his foreign investment was when Yar'Adua came in, and Beto and some other people were saying they should be allowed to import. And he said, well, but we have a pact with government to increase local production. We have spent the money, and we need to be allowed to recoup those monies. And if we won't be allowed to recoup those monies, then I'll go and invest abroad. Well, so he was diversifying his risk. So what I'm saying is that in the oil and gas sector, we've had legislation which hasn't worked as it should, but it seems to be working over time in some way. And in cement production, we didn't have such legislation, but we might need to find out the measures by which it succeeded. The important thing again is the what you call the political will, and that consistency of consistency of implementation. But it shows the issue around stakeholders. As I did mention, some people are importers, some people are producers. Maybe we can find a way to help them, sort of work together. Unfortunately, the way the law of economics works is that when industries consolidate, bigger players become bigger, and smaller players are marginalized.
Okay.
But you have a lot of people who use government and man knows who to look for policies to sort of walk around anything government is trying to do to help local production.
Okay.
And it will always be there, but we need leaders who are determined and who work with the right policies to minimize those types of interference, which is usually corruptly driven.
Thank you very much, Professor. So like you have said, we all need to work together to make this policy work. And like you have said, no doubt it's a good policy. We should consume what we produce and therefore produce what we're going to consume. Even though I say tongue-in-cheek, Professor, that many producers have packed up their bags and left this country, GSK, P&G, and Dunlop, people like that. But we need to find ways of bringing them back so that we can produce what we are going to consume. Professor Olawale Ajayi is Professor of Legal, Social, and Political Environment of Business and Head of Department of Strategy, Lagos Business School. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.